Did you ever wonder why the Native Americans helped the Pilgrims in 1621? Did you ever wonder how these people communicated or why they got together in the first place to eat? Listen to this podcast and discover the history of the first Thanksgiving. We can only guess what the Wampanoag must have thought when they first saw the strange ships of the Pilgrims arriving on their shores. But their custom was to help visitors, and they treated the newcomers with courtesy. It was mainly because of their kindness that the Pilgrims survived at all. The wheat the Pilgrims had brought with them to plant would not grow in the rocky soil. They needed to learn the new ways for a new world, and the man who came to their help was called Tisquanto, or Squanto. Squanto was originally from the village of Pawtucket and a member of the Pokanoket Wampanoag Nation. Pawtucket once stood on the exact site where the Pilgrims built Plymouth. In 1605, 15 years before the Pilgrims came, Squanto went to England with a friendly English explorer named John Weymouth. He had many adventures and learned to speak English. Squanto came back to New England with Captain Weymouth. Later, Squanto was captured by a British slaver who raided the village and sold Squanto to the Spanish in the Caribbean islands. A Spanish Franciscan priest befriended Squanto and helped him get to Spain and later on a ship to England. Squanto then found Captain Weymouth, who paid his way back to his homeland. In England, Squanto met Samoset of the Wabanaki tribe, who had also left his native home with an English explorer. They both returned together to Pawtucket in 1620. When they arrived, the village was deserted and there were skeletons everywhere. Everyone in the village had died from an illness the English slavers had left behind. Squanto and Samoset went to stay with the neighboring village of Wampanoag. 1 year later, in the spring, Squanto and Samoset were hunting along the beach near Pawtucket. They were startled to see people from England in their deserted village. For several days, they stayed nearby, observing the newcomers. Finally, they decided to approach them. Samoset walked into the village and said, "Welcome." Squanto soon joined him. The Pilgrims were very surprised to meet the two Indians who spoke English. The Pilgrims were not in good condition. They were living in dirt-covered shelters. There was a shortage of food, and nearly half of them had died during the winter. They obviously needed help, and the two men were a welcome sight. Squanto, who probably knew more English than any other Indian in North America at that time, decided to stay with the Pilgrims for the next few months and teach them how to survive in this new place. He brought them deer meat and beaver skins. He taught them how to cultivate corn and other new vegetables, and how to build Indian-style houses. He also pointed out poisonous plants and showed how other plants could be used as medicine. He explained how to dig and cook clams, how to get sap from the maple trees, use fish for fertilizer, and dozens of other skills needed for their survival. By the time fall arrived, things were going much better for the Pilgrims, thanks to the help they had received. The corn they planted had grown well. There was enough food to last the winter. They were living comfortably in their Indian-style wigwams, and they had also managed to build one European-style building out of squared logs. This was their church. They were now in better health, and they knew more about surviving in this new land. The Pilgrims decided to have a Thanksgiving feast to celebrate their good fortune. They had observed Thanksgiving feasts in November as religious obligations in England for many years before coming to the New World. Captain Miles Standish, the leader of the Pilgrims, invited Squanto, Samoset, Massasoit, who was the leader of the Wampanoags, and their immediate families to join them for a celebration, but they had no idea how big Indian families could be. As Thanksgiving feast began, the Pilgrims were overwhelmed with the large turnout of 90 relatives that Squanto and Samoset brought with them. The Pilgrims were not prepared to feed a gathering of people that large for 3 days. Seeing this, Massasoit gave orders to his men within the first hour of his arrival to go home and get more food. Thus it happened that the Indians supplied the majority of the food: 5 deer, many wild waterfowl, fish, beans, squash, corn soup, cornbread, and berries. Captain Standish sat at one end of a long table, and the clan chief Massasoit sat at the other end. For the first time, the Wampanoag people were sitting at a table to eat instead of on mats or furs spread on the ground. The Indian women sat together with the Indian men to eat. The Pilgrim women, however, stood quietly behind the table and waited until after their men had eaten, since that was their custom. For 3 days, the Wampanoags feasted with the Pilgrims. It was a special time of friendship between two very different groups of people. A peace and friendship agreement was made between Massasoit and Miles Standish, giving the Pilgrims the clearing in the forest where the old Pawtucket village once stood to build their new town of Plymouth. It would be very good to say that this friendship lasted a long time, but unfortunately, that was not to be. More English people came to America, and as they were not in need of help from the Indians, as were the original Pilgrims, many of the newcomers forgot the help the Indians had given them. Mistrust started to grow, and their friendship weakened. Pilgrims started telling their Indian neighbors that their Indian religions and customs were wrong. The Pilgrims displayed an intolerance toward the Indian religion similar to the intolerance displayed toward the less popular religions in Europe. The relationship deteriorated, and within a few years, the children of the people who ate together at the first Thanksgiving were killing one another in what came to be called King Philip's War.